Hey everybody, welcome back to Masters of the Order. Got a great interview coming up here for you. Just wanted to do a little intro because the interview was so good. I split it up into two parts because it was so long. So this is going to be part one of the interview with Danny Keller, who was a animation supervisor and then animations director for a lot of episodes of the Clone Wars. So you know how much I love the Clone Wars. This is going to be really fun. Lots of great content here from Danny, from his past all the way up to working with Lucasfilm and all the other movies and shows that he's worked on. So sit back and get ready for part one. Once you're done with part one, go and look for part two and get the full story here with my conversation with Danny Keller. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Masters of the Order, where we deep dive with those people that have actually traveled to the galaxy far, far away and worked on Star Wars projects. I'm honored to be joined tonight with Danny Keller, animations director. How are you, Danny?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm going to run down. Yes, great to see you again. We'll get into a lot of stuff Star Wars wise, but I do want to mention your background a little bit. Animations director, but you've been visual effects. We're going to deep dive again, like into your past, but working with DreamWorks and Disney and Weta. You even mentioned Rhythm and Hues, EA, working on projects like Garfield, Rangers Reloaded. Meet the Robinsons, which I love that show. I love that movie. And then another one I love too is Eight-Legged Freaks.
That's awesome that you love it.
Yeah, which is funny because I actually talked to Greg Grunberg too a couple times at some cons. So
that was one of my first films.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So we're going to get on that. But the big thing that we're going to talk to you about mainly is your direction contributions to the Clone Wars, 10 episodes and some of my favorites on that list. So real quick though, I do got to mention, I ran into Danny. Danny and I actually go back a ways. We are from the same.
We went to the same high school.
We went to the same high school. Yeah. This is crazy. Yeah.
And I hadn't seen you. One, I hadn't seen you in forever. Two, at the time, I did not realize you were as much of a Star Wars person as I was. Because I think to a certain degree, when you're high school, you kind of, I don't know who's going to be that person.
That's right.
I remember, I was kind of like this odd person. Everyone feels odd in high school,
yes,
for that matter. But I was an artist, but I also played sports.
Right.
So it was kind of like those worlds. Like I had friends in completely different worlds who would never dream of talking to each other. So the idea of talking Star Wars with anyone was always kind of like an odd thing at the time. And at that time it was kind of in between, God bless,
yes,
there was the Timothy Zahn novels that kind of took us there and that kind of stood in, this was obviously before Clone Wars came out. So it was that in between, before prequels.
Before prequels.
Yeah. Anyway, like you were saying, flash forward to this year and our amazing Bengals.
Yes.
Our Cincinnati Bengals, our Super Bowl AFC Championship Bengals.
Yes.
Made it to the Super Bowl. And
yes,
of course, if you're a diehard fan, you're like, it's a bucket list. If they ever make it to the Super Bowl, I have to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there and I turn around and there you are.
I know, right? I'm sitting there walking. And we shouldn't have. We actually got lucky and got those tailgate tickets, right?
Just the same way. It was,
yeah.
It just kind of got lucky, and I'm like, I'm not going to pass up this chance because who knows if they're ever going to be back. Yeah.
So
that was pretty amazing. Yeah.
I'm there walking, and I get the gentleman you're with, Kesson. He yells over to me like, "Cottingham, come over here." I'm like, "Hey, what's up?" And he's like, "I'm here with Keller." I'm like, "What? Really?" And then eventually you came over. And I still, at that point, had not known you actually worked on Star Wars.
Yeah. That's so funny.
Yeah. So great. So,
and I had no idea you had this amazing podcast. and had such a sultry radio voice. I've got a little cold, so maybe I can. One man, one way. Maybe I can do what you're doing. But,
oh man, no.
But yeah, I love it, man. I've listened to it ever since I found this out. I've listened to some back episodes, and congratulations! It's an awesome show, and your fans are lucky to have you. And the fact that you do this as often as you do is so impressive. So cheers to you, man.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was telling you, my family goes to bed early, and I'm a night owl, so I get to do these night talks with you and with the fans and all that stuff. So it's fantastic. As long as there's Star Wars out there, I keep saying, as long as there's Star Wars, I'll keep talking about it. So
well, right now is a good time for it.
It absolutely is. It's almost overwhelming in a way. So
yeah, and we were talking back during the Clone Wars days. It was Clone Wars, and then Seth Green had started to do Detours.
Detours, that's right.
And it was just those two shows plus the games that were going to start. And even at that point, there were conversations of how much Star Wars is too much Star Wars.
Yes, that's right.
Fast forward to what we're doing now, and obviously we can handle more than two shows.
That's right. But at the time you were there, it was still George's Lucasfilm.
Oh yeah.
Right. So it was hard. I feel like it was harder for him to mass produce things because he was pretty much funding everything himself, right? I mean, with Lucasfilm in a sense.
Oh yeah. It was his. So we started to make Clone Wars without an actual distributor, meaning George was paying to make Clone Wars out of his pocket, but we hadn't signed a deal with Cartoon Network to actually have a place for it to be broadcast.
Wow.
Which George it's Star Wars. He can take that bet because you're like, someone's going to pick this up. It'd be ridiculous for them not to. But I remember him saying, if no one picks the show up, I'll still pay you guys to make this so I can watch it in my basement.
Oh man!
So there was a time where we weren't even, we didn't know where we were going to end up. Luckily, it ended up on Cartoon Network. It was in some odd time slots, I think, at the time, because I don't think anyone really knew what to do with it because it started in the afternoon and then it turned into a primetime show. But it really didn't feel like it took off until it went to Netflix. Obviously streaming was taking off, but I feel like a lot of people either re-embraced the show or just purely became aware of it.
Right.
And I just remember reading all the new positive reviews being like, what? Yeah, this has been here.
Yeah.
Like when we were making it, we would tell each other like, you know what, we're making kind of like feature film quality stuff story-wise on a weekly basis.
That's right.
Right. Mm-hmm. Which is like back in the day. Yeah. Like it was that far away. But back then, we were on an actual broadcast schedule once we got picked up, meaning like we had strict deadlines of, okay, we have to start this episode from script to final color in X amount of time because it has to be, on TV in this specific time slot. Now with streaming, with so many, with Disney Plus, it's kind of like there's a general release window, but it's not like a staggered weekly, deadline. So deadlines are still there. I'm not saying like people don't have to work under deadlines, but it's a little bit different now than it was then.
Well, that's interesting because I remember when a couple times I went to Celebration and heard Filoni talking. Is it true in a sense that it sounded like the way he described it was you guys were almost a season ahead?
That's true because initially we had started off, so like a season was 25 to 27 episodes. And then even then we would start production on like the next season. So before that and when I say start, I mean like writing the stories and starting like the direction of the story reels. So like when I was directing, I was working on 3 episodes at the same time. I was breaking down and reviewing a script, actually making one in the story reel phase where we're actually composing the shots and creating the rough like kind of story reel edit, and then making notes as it was going into animation and lighting. And it, like that kind of 3 episode chunk would just constantly kind of move forward. So what he was saying is true. I remember we were at Comic-Con one year and talking, and someone would stand up and say, can you do this and this and this? And I just remember looking over at Dave, and like later on, we're like, little do they know, like we've already done that. And then when it comes out, the fan's going to be like, I told him to do that.
That's exactly right. I would be one of the ones that did that, probably. Yeah.
Probably, yeah. But it's awesome. I mean, speaking of Comic-Con, and obviously I didn't have an opportunity to go to Celebration this year, but man, that's why you do it. That's why you do what you do. And, the energy and the positive reaction that you get from people. And when you find someone that truly loves what you do, I mean, that's the gift. Like, yes. I don't know the band Blind Melon. I don't know how many people know that band, but there's a video of like this little girl who was a bee, and she was out of place, and she doesn't have anyone who is who she is. And then at the end of the video, she finds all these other people dressed like bees. And it's like, I found my people. Yes. Like, I remember the first time I went to Comic-Con, and I drove up, and there was like a dad dressed as Wolverine carrying his son with a Yoda backpack, and a 3-year-old dressed up like Chewbacca, and, 5 people in a circle dressed like Harry Potter, talking, really, passionately about like, no, that's not what I think was this, like, you're like, this is good.
This is good. Yeah. Yes. The cons are, it's you could never really understand what a con is like until you go to it. I mean, you just, and you got to be into it. You got to be into that culture. It's like, there's positives and pluses and minuses, right? Like after 3 days and no one's taking a shower, and, maybe con crud, right?
Yeah. And the fire department maybe is a little lax in the number of people that really should be inside next to each other. Yeah.
It's definitely. Okay. So we did talk about your background a little bit, so we don't really need to deep dive there, but I do want to start really somewhat further back, and, getting into this animation. And, I remember when we were younger, and I had heard that you had moved out to Los Angeles and pursued what I had heard from friends back home was that you got into the gaming world at first. But what was the moment? Can you remember when was the moment that you decided this is the route I want to go? This is the career I want to go into.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I grew up loving Star Wars. Like, Star Wars was my world. I think creatures and monsters as well. Like, growing up through the 80s and like loving Gremlins and,
yes.
like that. At that time, I wasn't really into the classic Disney films. I was more into like, Jaws and Raiders and Gremlins, and definitely Star Wars. Like I remember growing up and coming home from school, and I think every day after school, I would watch some portion of Empire Strikes Back before homework, and it was probably mostly the Dagobah training sequence. And I'm a fan of like the training kind of teaching and all of the shows, probably just because of the magic that's there. But yeah, I think I always wanted to be an artist. My older sister was a graphic designer, and I thought, well, that was what I wanted to be. And then when I got into learning a little bit more about what it was, I realized that might be a little too anal for what I could personally handle, like typesetting and typefacing. I was more into drawing and monsters and storytelling. So I always wanted to pursue that route. But I think what made it click for me was when the first Jurassic Park came out, and it was creatures on the screen with actors. And then knowing like what I had already seen with puppetry and stop motion animation growing up, right? Like seeing those behind the scenes, or like, I still have VHS tapes where, pre-DVD era, where you knew something was coming on TV, the making of Star Wars, and like, hit play record. And like, and then maybe you hit pause when the commercial comes on.
Yes.
And then unpause, so you don't have to watch the commercials back. But I probably had VHS tapes. Like, I did not have Star Wars on like an official CBS Fox tape. My Star Wars was on like,
a recorded tape. Mine too.
Tape, handwritten. I see if I have a picture of that somewhere. I see if I can send it to you.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so once that hit, then I was like, well, what is this, computer animation? Because it had kind of taken steps from the young Sherlock Holmes, and then into, The Abyss. And then Jurassic Park was like creatures and like actual solid performance. So I started researching schools that had animation, and I found there was one in the only one that was really doing CG computer animation at the time. There was a small place in Indiana, I think Vincennes, and then Ringling School of Art and Design in Sarasota, Florida. And then there was traditional hand-drawn animation at Cal Arts in Sheridan in California. So like growing up in Northern Kentucky, vacation was going to Florida most of the time.
Yes.
So it just happened, like, I think it was sophomore or junior year, we were going to Florida. So I talked my parents into just stopping by the school. So we drove through Sarasota, stopped at Ringling, got more information. And then I just started building my portfolio for that. And God bless Jim Dorfline at Newport Catholic. His thing was like, don't worry, Keller, just make art. It'll all happen. Just make art and you don't have to worry. And that there's always a truth to that. But there's also a truth to like, I need to get a portfolio together so I can send it there and get accepted.
Yes.
And at that time, computers weren't as readily available. So there was only a finite number of people they were accepting. So I applied to my portfolio and I got accepted. And I can remember, like, in our high school, they said over the intercom, like, where people were going to college. Oh. And I remember the day they said, Danny Keller is going to Ringling School of Art and Design. And everybody thought I was going to be a clown. Because they're like, are you going to clown school? Are you going to Ringling Brothers School? Are you going to clown school? And I was like, that would be pretty cool. And it actually was founded by John Ringling, who was one of the Ringling brothers. But him and his wife, Mabel, went to Sarasota and created this huge artist community. If you're ever down there, the museum there is amazing. Some really great paintings there. But yeah, so I went down there, studied animation. I got a master's, I majored in animation and I got a minor in photography. And then when I graduated there, as you mentioned, I got a job at DreamWorks Interactive. Nice. Which was Spielberg. It was kind of between Microsoft and Spielberg, and DreamWorks at the time, Spielberg, Jeffrey Katzenberg and David Geffen. It was like DreamWorks SKG at the time. Right, yeah. So they had everything. They had film, animation, and games. So I went out to start on games, which is weird. So sorry to back up again. Now it's all kind of coming back to me. Growing up, loving Star Wars, like ILM was like the jam.
Yes.
Right. And like, growing up in a Catholic family, like my mom, like, and I knew it was in San Rafael, and like my mom had like a thing of all the saints, and there was like Saint Raphael. So it was like, I will pray to Saint Raphael. So this happens. But so I was interviewing with ILM, and they were having an entry-level group of animators come in. Because at the time, Universal was doing a CG version of Frankenstein. And they did a test, which I'm sure it's out there on the internet, was absolutely amazing test. It was of a CG Frankenstein walking down the stairs in Frankenstein's laboratory, and lightning strikes, and you see the Frankenstein monster there, and never got greenlit. So they never hired anybody. So I didn't get a job there. And then at the time, Rhythm and Hughes, who did Garfield, who I'm trying to think of what was like the last thing that they did before they closed. But anyway, they were also had to start like an entry level class that they were going to bring in for a redo of The Incredible Mr. Limpet, which the original one was with Don Knotts, and they were going to do one with Jim Carrey. Again, it didn't happen. So that was kind of like my first thing, a lot of like actors, and that, it doesn't happen the first time. Like I had actually come home from school, and when I was at home, and I just remember like, oh my God, I'm in debt out my wazoo for college. Yeah. And I came from a low to middle income family. Like this was me, right? I remember being in college, and I was one of the few people that knew how much each credit hour cost me. Yeah. And like kids didn't come to class. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, you're burning money. Like, so when I got out, I was like, Christ, I could have bought a Ferrari or got a college education. Yeah. Like, I think I chose the right way. So there was like, if anything, I guess what I'm saying, there's always going to be self-doubt. And And like everything in life, it doesn't come when and how you want it to, but if you keep working at it, it comes. Just keep working and keeping your eyes open. But so like animated feature was the thing that I wanted to do like right away. Mm-hmm. But this opportunity at DreamWorks Interactive came up, which worked because they paid to fly me. They paid to move me out there, nice. Get an apartment while I found a place. And I had a blast. And the cool thing was, I got to meet Spielberg. I got to get feedback from Spielberg. We ended up working with Clive Barker. Nice. And he came in. And I got to do character design, modeling, animation, a little bit of story. So I got to learn how to work really quickly early, so that then I did get an opportunity to work in features. So that's when I went to Centropolis, which was a visual effects company owned by Dean Devlin and Roland Emmerich, the guys that did ID4.
Yes.
They had just finished up Godzilla and the Patriot. They were doing this kind of campy spider film, which was Eight-Legged Freaks.
Yes.
With David Arquette.
Love it.
And Kari Wurr, who was at the time big post like MTV at the time. If you'd watched Remote Control, she was on Remote Control with Colin Quinn.
Yes.
But which was a great fun film. I think it could have done a lot better if it was marketed a little bit differently. Yes. And the poster was always kind of weird. Like I wish they did a more of like them, like the classic them monster film. Like it was more like that.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: it was Scarlett Johansson's like first big film. So I got to act. She was in it. That's right. I got to act in a film with Scarlett Johansson. Like I did a scene. Like my first scene was the spider climbs in through a window and shoves Scarlett Johansson up against the wall and like traps her in a web. All like kind of Stranger Things kind of thing. But which was it was like the perfect kind of first step for me into feature film. So this company was owned by a German investment company. So most of the money coming was from the German economy. So we had done a lot of different separate films. Ended up working on the Matrix sequels. Mm-hmm. And they were supposed to do the second and the third Matrix sequels. But at the time, the bid, Warner Brothers, who was the production company on Matrix, wasn't going to pay Centropolis until the work was done. So all of the salaries were coming straight off of Centropolis's pocket. Well, the German economy tanked. So Centropolis couldn't pay. They went to Sony for money, or they went to Warner Brothers for money, and Warner Brothers said no. So that company closed. Warner Brothers took all of the work and gave it to another company, and like everybody was laid off. Oh, man. So that was like another holy shit moment. Like, wow, the rug can be pulled out from you at any moment. So be prepared. Like you bring a lot of people bring toys and stuff to decorate their office. And I remember working with like an older artist, and he's like, never bring more than can fit in a box. Because
you never know. You never know.
You just, because you got to put it in that box and get out. Which was it was a little bit more curmudgeon-y. And this is me, like my first gig at DreamWorks Interactive, I had my own office and I had my Star Wars figures all over everywhere. Like it was like your room, right? Yeah. And it was that was my first gig, was we had our own private office with the door that closed, all the food you could eat. This was DreamWorks money at the time. And I was and then you go to another studio and you're working in the corner of a soundstage and it's dark and you got a cube. So work every, so that kind of ended that first part of that. But then I moved to Rhythm and Hughes, who were working on the first Garfield, which was great. That was a good opportunity. The next move from there, I went to Disney Feature Animation, which was on Meet the Robinsons, which was awesome because it was the first show where a lot of the traditional animators were first learning CG. Mm-hmm. And I already knew CG. So what that gave me was the ability to ask a lot of questions, but have something to give back. to them. Like I could help them like learn the computer and understand that way, but not feel as guilty about like, okay, what about this? Or how did you handle this? Or what, you know, like, so I didn't feel like the little dog in the Chuck Jones cartoons jumping over the bulldog. Like, how about this, George? How about this? How about this? You know, like I felt like, okay, at least I feel like there's some reciprocation going on here. So after Disney, that was my next. I interviewed with ILM. That was when the first Transformers was starting.
Okay.
But then I ended up moving to New Zealand and working at Weta, which, believe it or not, Steven Spielberg still needs to get funding for films. So this was before Tintin was starting. So I worked on a test for Tintin. And then after that test finished, I started working on pre-production for the first Avatar, which again, it was a great one. I got to kind of have my work critiqued by Spielberg again, which was like, you know, someone you idolized as an artist growing up, but then also James Cameron.
Yes.
And then it was like, you know, people who have like, well, you know, James Cameron will make you a better artist. And other people are like, he's a slave driver. As in life, there's always two.
Probably a bit of both, right?
And it's somewhere in between, right? Like, you know, if someone has the one thing I value through all of this is I really like working with people that have clear visions, like knowing what you want, or at least having an idea. It's going to change. It needs to remain agile. It's going to change through the process, and the people that you bring together are going to change it. But if you start anything with someone who has a vision, you're going to make something much better than if you don't know what you're doing when you start.
Right.
You're going on a vacation, you buy tickets and you plan. You don't just walk out the door and like, where are we going to go? You can do that, and you probably will have some fun trips, but chances are it's going to be better if you have a little bit of planning behind you and a little bit of a vision of what you want.
Absolutely.
So before I went to Weta, like I said, I interviewed at ILM, and I was actually at home on Christmas vacation, and ILM flew me back. So I was living in LA, flew back to Kentucky for Christmas vacation. ILM flew me back out to San Francisco for an interview before Christmas. And while I was in town, I spent the night, and the person who toured me around ILM, I ended up kind of knowing a little bit more about ILM than she did. And you know, I was kind of joking about it, and she's like, I'm cutting this tour short.
Wow. Okay.
But that ended up being my wife.
Are you kidding me? Wow.
Yeah. So the girl who gave me the person I met for the first time, who gave me a tour of ILM, I ended up staying into town. So they actually invited me out that night because I was spending the night. So like, hey, you know, a coworker of ours is having a birthday. Why don't you come out and join us? So I was like, yeah, I mean, what am I going to do? Stay in So I went and I hung out with them. And then, you know, I kind of hit it off with her even more. And we kind of joked about the day. And then I stayed in touch with her. And I didn't take the job at ILM. I ended up moving to New Zealand to work at Weta.
Wow.
But then we stayed in touch, and like she actually came down to visit me while I was in New Zealand, and we toured the South Island, which is absolutely amazing. And then after that, I ended up getting a job and moving to the Bay Area. So Lucasfilm Animation at the time was working on a film that ended up becoming Stranger Magic, which I still have not seen.
Yeah,
not because I love the pain, but it was called Primrose at the time. It was under a different title, a different director. But Rob Coleman, who was the animation supervisor on the prequels, hired me to come up there. And then I ended up doing more story work than any kind of animation. And it kind of like bit, like it was like this other creative bug that bit me. And my director at the time was kind of the same. He was a traditional animator who then moved into directing. And he's like, look, once you start doing story and you like it, you probably never go back.
Wow. Okay.
And so the other cool thing, through this whole process, and I didn't know this was going to be my wife at the time, but I ended up meeting my wife because of circumstances. And then I ultimately end up at Lucasfilm. It's not ILM, but it's Lucasfilm.
Lucasfilm, yeah.
But it feels like it was serendipitous because I'm up at the ranch at this point, right? Like we're working at Big Rock Ranch, which is right next to Skywalker Ranch. Okay. Absolutely, probably the most beautiful place I will ever work in my life. Beautiful facility, beautiful area up in the hills. Only one exit south of where I am right now, believe it or not.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which is, yeah. But anyway, so I was doing story work, and ZViz, which is kind of like a proprietary story software based off of Lucasfilm ILM software, was just kind of in its infancy. So we were kind of breaking it and trying to improve it and make it better. Because again, George being the pioneer, between Edit Droid that became Avid, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, kind of like a lot of feature films, that is just like how they're cut or edited together or pieced together. Right. They're all done on Avid. There's Final Cut Pro as well now, but Avid was like the thing at the time. And obviously pioneering sound design with THX. So he was, again, pushing, how are we going to make films faster and put it in the hands of an individual artist, so that like an actual director could theoretically make a film himself if he wanted to and understood the tools. So coming from an animation background, I could pose characters quickly, and always, from a photography background. And like, I grew up, like for me, movies were Spielberg and Lucas, but like when I first saw Lawrence of Arabia, like to me, I say that's cinema. Like you have movies and you have, like, in my mind, that felt like something different. Like the 70 millimeter widescreen format, the way that the frame was composed, the forces in the frame, the way it was cut, the way it was shot, it just like dramatically affected me. So I think having that kind of just sense of composition allowed some of this stuff to come a little bit easier to me. So like, to me, ZViz was amazing because you can pose your characters, and it was like doing a 2D storyboard, but you shot it more like a live action film where you have camera coverage. So you have like 1, 2, or 3 or A, B, and C cameras that are shooting the scene that you've posed out, and then you can immediately edit it together. And then if you want to make a change, you can go and make a change, but you can make a change on a specific shot that won't affect the other shots at all. So it was a really cool tool. It still is. Yeah. They stopped using it for a long time and starting to use it again. But that became the tool. So I started on Primrose. George was at a place where he decided, you know what, I don't want to finish rewriting this movie. So that movie got put on hold. So I had just moved to San Francisco, and I was like, oh man, I think maybe I was there 6 months, and then the movie got put on hold. But they're like, look, we'd love to keep you on. We don't have any features right now, but would you like to move on to this show called Clone Wars? And I was like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Of course I would.
Yeah.
And at the time, Rob Coleman was still there. Rob directed an episode in the first season. And, people knew what it was, but not really what it was supposed to be. And most of the first season was already complete at that time. So they asked me to come over and supervise the animation because they knew I had an animation background, which I kind of like. I wanted to stay there. It was Lucasfilm. This was an amazing spot, amazing people, a great opportunity. So I moved over, and, at the time, it was studios only in Taipei and Singapore. There was a lot of expats in Singapore who spoke English, but the majority of the artists in Taipei only spoke Mandarin. So a lot of those and they were very inexperienced animators. So, and I think that kind of showed up a lot in season 1. So, I came over and I saw that. I was like, wow, this is really, 1, there was an inexperienced crew. And 2, it was a very tight deadline for what they were trying to do based on the budget. So
none of the episodes that had aired yet, though, right?
No, there's still, this was, man, I'm trying to remember how there may have been 15 episodes done at the time.
Mm-hmm.
When I came over. When I first came over, so this is public knowledge. The feature film that came out was essentially like the first 4 episodes cut together. No one that was working on the show intended that to be a feature film at the time, right? I think George was like so proud of it at the end that he was like, man, this could easily be in the theater at this point. Like, we should make this a movie and like use it as a marketing thing for the actual TV show.
For the show, yep.
So yeah, when I came on, they were in the process of cutting everything together. And for me, and then I ended up flying Catherine Winder, who was the producer who kind of started the studio. Like, she is the one who helped build it with George. Like, if you ever hear Dave Filoni talk about getting this call and thinking someone was joking with him, that person's Catherine Winder. Like, I don't know if she gets mentioned enough for like building that up, but you know, she was kind of like the face of the studio for a while, before Dave had kind of like built everything up and started to tell some amazing stories. But yeah, she was building the studio up. Sorry, I'm kind of getting long-winded on all of this. So
no, you're fine.
Please cut me off.
This is good stuff. This is good stuff.
But yeah, so the I kind of came in. Yeah, so I came in and I was just like, you know, hey, I ended up. Oh, sorry, I was saying Catherine took us out to meet all the studios. So I flying into Hong Kong and to Taipei and then into Singapore, and you know, especially now at post-pandemic and everyone's working remotely, there's a lot of connection that can be made just via cameras. But there's still something to be said about being in person and meeting someone and just having that chemical energy, even with people that don't speak a lot of the same language. If you're an animator, like I talk a lot with my hands. You know, we can talk about how something should look or move or looking at reference. So that was really big for me because I got to build a connection with these people that were over there and like seeing, like learning about them and seeing how much they care about their families and how hard they want to work and learn. And the people that were, you know, already good animators and were doing strong work in Singapore, like what do they need to get better? So when I came back, I started just videotaping myself for like every episode. Like almost most of the performances I would just kind of act out and send a lot of those things over. A lot for like the Mandarin speaking teams because I knew like you know, when we speak, we enunciate words a lot more. Whereas like a Mandarin language, you know, the words don't require a lot of lip movement. So if you're trying to look at yourself to convey a performance, it's a lot more challenging. So I would be the goofball, like saying, look at me, I'm the jerk, the weirdo here, so just feel free. So there's a lot of footage. There's probably a lot of footage somewhere of very embarrassing me being like Jocasta Nu and
nice.
There's always like good little lines. And even like we did a lot of, and then moving into doing temp voices for our shows when we were directing it, like we would all record ourselves for temp voices.
Okay.
Like I would do a lot of Yoda, yes. But like doing, I always remember, I forget what episode it was where Jocasta Nu, was it Ord? There was like a blue alien who came in and it was like a shapeshifter, like could turn into
like
Jocasta.
a changeling?
Yeah, there was a changeling that turned into Jocasta, but I just remember she's like, I'm the librarian now. Yeah. And I just, that was like a thing that was like a funny thing I would always pick up, like with the production coordinator, always made me laugh about that. Or there was one with, oh my God, I'm trying to remember the little villagers that could turn into balls and roll.
Oh gosh.
Oh God, I'm forgetting now. But there's creatures out there. Yeah, there's a lot of little lines like that you just always kind of like, they're like brained in the burned into your brain. Or doing like Kiadi Monday, and like the line that gets you into character is that your thoughts dwell on your mother.
Yeah, you know, that's right.
Like,
that's right.
Like, there's like little lines where you're like, I gotta say that. That's gonna get me in character, and then I'm done.
Wow.
But anyway, so cut that down as like, you know, it was really rewarding because you saw these people, these animators and artists who started at one area and just kept pushing. And like now, like the one studio, CGCG, is like one of the premier outsourcing collaborators that every animated show works with now. Like CGCG start out doing very primitive, I think maybe like a Care Bear show, and then Clone Wars kind of like transformed that studio into, you know, now they're doing so many other amazing things.
So you guys continually worked with them throughout the
oh
seasons?
Yeah, CGCG still does Bad Batch.
Oh wow!
Yeah, the same studio. CGCG is one of the studios. So Lucasfilm purchased. Lucasfilm partly owns them now, I believe. I'm not sure about the business behind it now.
Okay,
but they had their own studio in Singapore, and they were animating on Clone Wars at the time. But then they stopped working on Clone Wars and only do like straight up visual effects now. They don't do any Clone Wars or Bad Batch episodes now. But yeah, they still work on the same stuff. And they come a long way. And like there were definitely like, we were always trying to push for, you know, more organic pliability in characters. Like even though like the chiseled kind of puppetry look was kind of the style, it was like, yeah, but we don't want it to feel too stiff. Like you can kind of see, like, I think the Mortis episodes, you might be able to see the delineation of, I think Shakti might have been the first person that we put more pliable facial shapes on. And then I think Anakin. And then after that, definitely the father.
Yes.
You see like the face and that start to move and get a little bit more pliable, and it grows and grows and grows from that point on, you know.
Yeah.
You still have, based on the models, I think like for me, the clone legs are always like toothpick sticks. I never got over that, but
that is funny. Funny.
But I'm sorry, again, cut me off or fast forward me whenever.
Well, I gotta bring up this before I forget. Cause it was so eerie when you first started talking about this. I actually did a tour of Ringling like 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Okay.
2 or 3 years ago. Before the pandemic.
Okay. That's a mega campus now.
Oh my gosh. It is gorgeous. I had no idea you went there.
Yeah.
They built all new studios, like production studios.
Oh my God. The place is absolutely gorgeous now. It probably rivals or is better than some feature film studios now.
Yes.
Because of just the donations and, you know, obviously the built up over the years. Yeah. It's funny because when I went there, it was pretty, you know, it was one of the few places that had computer animation anywhere in the country. But, you know, we had to sign up for lab time because there were, you know, 60 computers and 100 students. So everybody couldn't work at the same time. I got a lab job working in the lab. So I was there in case someone didn't show up, or if someone left early, I'm on that computer.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm on there working. So, but Flash, you know, then like, Christ, this was like when Windows NT came out, and it was like Alias Wavefront went to Maya, and Maya came out on NT. So like you can work on Maya at home on a laptop, not even leave your house, right?
Yeah.
But back then it was like, you know, you had to fight for the opportunity to learn software. But yeah, now there was a Shell station across the street that we would always go to late at night. And they finally, this was way after I graduated, they finally bought it out, tore it down. Now it's like a brand new, shiny, beautiful facility.
Yeah. Right when shortly after I was there, Kevin Smith actually did a movie down there.
Yeah.
Using students from Ringling.
Yeah, they did not have a film major. That's within the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm as I'm going through there, I'm thinking, man, this is amazing for kids. And now my daughter, all of a sudden, my oldest daughter, her dream job is Pixar. She wants to be a Pixar animator. So I've got all the info that I've kept from Ringling. So I'm thinking, man, I might have to send her down there for that. That's good to know that you came out of there.
Yeah, let me know. I still know some folks down there. So
yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So
So I ended up working in story or animation supervision. But then I went back to working in ZViz and doing story. And it got to the point where I was doing all of the animation supervision work during the day. And then I would start doing story at like 6. And it got where I was just working 2 jobs. And Athena Portillo, who is now like an awesome EP there, she was a coordinator at the time. And she was like, would come in and like listen to me do dailies and give animation feedback. And, you know, she was kind of like someone who kind of championed me and kind of put me in front of Dave and said, look, this guy can do this. And I was like, look, I can't do 2 jobs at the same time. And kind of story is my love. So then they offered me an opportunity to become an episodic director. So
it's awesome.
So broadcast season 4, you know,
yes,
it was at kind of season 3, but I started doing episodes and directing episodes, and then brought in a buddy of mine to take over animation duties from me, so I could just focus solely on story.
Yes.
But yeah, that was like, as someone who grew up loving Star Wars, like a lot of us do, you know, I had been blessed to work with a lot of amazing names, but I remember the first episode that I sat down in the screening room and George is sitting directly behind me.
Oh man.
And it's not like I'm just showing him an animated shot, right? It's not like, hey, this is a shot. And he's like, yeah, do this. This is like, I did this episode of a story. I am responsible. Like, you know, I either get good vibes or bad vibes based on this. Like, it's all coming, you know, it's all on me.
Yes.
So that was like, you know, as much as you don't get starstruck, like I always compare it to, you know, if you're driving down the street and a cop is behind you, even if you're not doing anything, you still feel kind of guilty. That's the same thing. Like if there's a star or someone famous, you still kind of feel that way. Like I think famous people feel that way around famous people.
Yeah, totally.
Regardless of how tenured you are, I think you still kind of have like that. Oh, hey, there's something there. But anyway, so that was like a great kind of, you know, milestone, I guess, in my creative life, kind of sitting there realizing like, man, I was playing in the dirt with action figures as a kid. Like I remember, like I inherited figures from my brother, and I didn't have a tauntaun, but I had a dewback, but I wanted a tauntaun, so I spray painted my dewback white. So I was like, I'm like a kid playing with like the white dewback, you know, and now I'm like playing with the actual real action figures, like making the Star Wars.
Oh my gosh.
So that was a really cool moment. And like after like my first episode finished, you know, the executive producer got a letter from George and he was just complimenting how much he liked the episode. And he gave me that letter. I still have that letter.
Oh man.
One of the few things, like what we had a lunch, before we went to the Emmys. We were nominated, all the directors were nominated for the Emmys. George had us up for a lunch at the ranch, and it was just us, Filoni, and George. And I, you know, at the time I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to see this guy again in my life. So I had this Australian day bill that I had of like the original New Hope poster.
Oh man.
So I brought it, right? I rolled it up. I brought it with me. And I came in and I sat it in the corner of the kitchen at the ranch, right? If the opportunity brings up, you know, because when you first start, there's the fear of God speech, like, don't look George in the eye, don't touch him, you know, like, and he's not like that at all, right? He is not like that at all. Like, I remember the first time George kept, you know, when you're walking to the elevator or you're walking to a door and, you know, you just leave the door open for the next person. I remember the first time George prop the door open for me to walk through a door. I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? You know, because they purposely do that just so you don't do something you're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
But he is by no means that. I don't know if you've ever listened to that one. Is it Inside Star Wars, that audio podcast? If you haven't, it's amazing. Do yourself a treat. They do the life of George and the making of Star Wars, but as a radio play. So they cast the voices.
Yes. I did listen to that. It's phenomenal.
It is. Like, I wish I had known all of that when I was working there, because it kind of says like, damn, he's just like us.
Yes.
He has the same insecurities. He has the same self-doubt. He's gone through that. Like, if you can find the things that make us all the same, it will get rid of all of the hatred in this world.
Yeah.
Because we all are like, you either love or hate your parents, but you've probably had loss in your life of some kind. So like there's some family energy. Like to me, a good Star Wars story is family.
Yeah.
That's what I love.
Totally.
Like, the new Obi-Wan series that it's out now, sorry, spoilers. I don't know if we need to do.
No, I think this will be out long after. Yeah.
But like bringing in the young Leia, it's another lone wolf and cub story, much like Grogu and
Mando. Yeah.
The Mando. Like it creates this family unit. It might not be a traditional family, but there's a family unit that's formed. Mm-hmm. So it creates a bond and it creates this fear of separation or loss. And I think that's, to me, has always been like the power of the storytelling through Star Wars. Sorry, that's jumping off onto tangents now.
No, totally. Well, I think.
But anyway, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, just like the energy of like sitting in front of him and like feeling that joy. Oh no, I was saying. So we were at this lunch before the Emmys. That's where I was.
Yes.
Sidebar back. We've come back to the screen. Yeah. So lunch is over. He's saying how proud of us he is and this and that. And everyone was kind of leaving. And we were taking our plates to get them cleaned. And I went and I grabbed it. And I was like, hey, George, it's been an honor working with you and telling your stories. Would you sign this for me? He's like, oh yeah, I'd love to sign it, like, and he's like, how should I sign it? And I'm like, at the time I was just like, however you want, just sign your name. And I was like, and he just signed George Lucas on. I'm like, shit, I should have just said, I love you, Danny. I was still kind of like in all like, okay, this is happening.
Yeah. So what did he do? Just George Lucas?
He just signed George Lucas. Oh, okay. Yeah. It's framed. So it's like one of the things. You should have said to my
best friend, Danny.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like after the fact, of course, you're like, I should have talked. But then I'm like, no one would have believed he did that. But I'm like, it would have been for me. And he probably would have thought I was a big prick for saying that. I think Filoni was in the corner somewhere going like,
yeah, don't let him leave with that.
You shouldn't be making George sign a poster. I'm like, man, I'm probably never going to see this guy. And it was just kind of like full circle of like this whole journey.
Oh yeah.
So that's like one of the main mementos, I think, from my time.
So when did that take place? When that
was so. I guess
when the buyout happened, or the buyout hadn't happened yet, did it?
That was in the process of happening. So
Clone Wars ended because of the buyout, right? Pretty much.
Right. Yeah. So we did. We won the Emmy in 2012, 13, 14, and then this was fifth for the 14, 15, because this was like the season 5.
Yes, season 5.
Yeah, this was at the season 5 had come out, and I guess season 6 had kind of been made.
Yes,
but it never had a home.
Right.
And yeah, like there's episodes that. This is public.
I'm gonna hold that thought because I'm gonna get into that. I do have questions about those.
Sorry, I'm just stream of. You got me like. My brain is going
this
back
is great.
to the past, and I'm pulling out.
This is great. This backstory stuff a lot of people don't know. Again, and a lot of people do, and I get questions sometimes too through the show. Is how do I get into this business? And because I work in the production business. It is localized and TV stuff, but nowhere on the animation side. So it's interesting, but
yeah. Oh man, the thing that you'll find out is everyone's path is different. Mm-hmm. Like the people that I work with on a daily basis, everyone gets there through a different path. So nothing is there's definitely recommendations to give.
Yeah. There's no set highway to get there. Right.
I had a teacher, he said, hunger is the best sauce. If you stay hungry, that is the best sauce to pour over anything in your life. If you want it, no one can tell you no. It's never too late, there's a lot of, especially when you're down and out and you're full of self-doubt and, shit hits the fan, a lot of these sayings sound cheesy as hell, right? Like through any of your trials and tribulations, like like through personal stories, like, like me and my wife trying to have a child, and it's like, it just doesn't happen. And like, I love kids. I come from a big family, but then, you're trying to have a kid, you can't have a kid, and you look around and you start hating kids. Right. Because it just kind of reminds you of like the pain, but and like I said earlier, it's like nothing comes when or how you want it. But if you keep at it, it will in some form. And then I think you look back and you realize that the form that it came in was probably the best form,
Yes. Right. So when you're sitting there in front of Lucas and you're, showing one of your episodes and your stories, I think this is something that the listeners would appreciate is how much, as a director, like how much actually of the episode was your story, or was it George's story that you were telling? How much did you were able to contribute to that story of those episodes?
So there's like writers' conferences. So George has maybe like one or two sentences of like a story he wants to tell. So he will have a writers' conference with the actual script writers who will write the show. So this happens way before, as an episodic director, that I get to touch it. So when I first get it, I'm given a quote unquote finished script, one that George is the screenwriters have gone through and they've gotten it approved and taken George's notes. So this is like a deemed ready for production.
Right.
Now, an episode at the time is 22 minutes. It's a half an hour show with commercials. And roughly like scripts are about a minute a page. So if you are given a script that's 37 pages long and it has action scenes in it, and say a line in that script says Ahsoka enters the battle of her life, like there's going to need to be cuts, right? So that's kind of like that would happen a lot, right? That got better as it went on, where things were like came in like more like 20 pages and you knew like you had time to evaluate. So for me, when I get a script, the first thing I do, I just read it as a fan. Like I just read it for entertainment. Then I go back and I read it as a director on how do I see this? How do I visualize the shots? Like, how does it flow? What makes sense to me? Like where when I was reading it as a fan, where did I go? Huh? Wait, what?
Yeah.
How did that, so then you kind of earmark those moments and you're like, okay, we have to clarify that or shoot it or adjust it. So the stories are George's stories. The writers then flush those stories out and bring life to them. The episodic director, we go in and whittle it down, extract what might not be needed, and then there may be new scenes that we do have to add in based on how we shoot it. So early on, it was shoot everything that's on the page. Even though it's going to be too long, shoot it all, let's cut it, let's see how long that initial edit is, and then do it in editorial. Yes. Then it went to where we were like, wait, this is, a lot of the stuff, there may be a lot of scenes that are, like you call them walk and talks, where a lot of the exposition is being delivered as characters walk down the hallway in the Jedi Temple, right? Or, and you're like, as a viewer, you're like, this is not entertaining.
Yeah.
But it's necessary. How do we do that? Either somewhere else or through the midst of some sort of conflict, or what do we not really need? So like for one instance, like this was kind of later on, but in the Jedi Who Knew Too Much, the Ahsoka arc that I directed,
yes,
Charles Murray, like one of the best scripts I've written. But there was a lot of, there was like a scene, like Act 3, I think is one of the things I'm most proud of, especially in that episode. But I think in Act 1, there's like a walk and talk in the Jedi Temple where Tarkin's walking with Anakin Ahsoka, and I don't think Obi's with them, but you start to see like Ahsoka talking about the Jedi, and Tarkin kind of insinuating that too, like,
Right.
Are they peacekeepers, and that, which is great. There's like a lot of meat to it, but finding a way to play with their reactions and shots of them, and what, like, just a close up of her reaction to what someone else said creates some sort of feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And then also being aware of, like, how long is this and what do they have to do? So it's like, oh, well, what if they're walking? There's all of these interesting things going on in the background, but then they go to an elevator, and like the elevator at least gives them action and gives Tarkin an exit, and kind of gives closure to like leave Ahsoka by herself, and like everybody kind of leaves Ahsoka, right? It becomes like, in a way, it's like Ahsoka's separation from the Jedi Order.
Yes.
And that people like Anakin is feeling left behind by Obi-Wan. By getting them in the elevator and getting them out, it leaves Ahsoka by herself, and it kind of makes her isolated, right? So
Yes.
those are things like, I want to make her feel isolated and separated. Then let's put everybody on an elevator and have them get out of there and leave her by herself. Those are kind of the things I think like the episodic direction brings to it. And like for me, I always love teaching moments, and trying to put heart in as much as possible.
Yeah.
Like even if it's like a little moment of like, did Ahsoka where the younglings, there's a younglings arc, which I love the younglings. Like, they rescue Ahsoka from the pirates, and then Hondo's captured there too, because Grievous has come and taken over the pirate stronghold. So they end up breaking in to free Ahsoka, but they also free Hondo. And the Katsuni, there's like a little bit of a relationship between Katsuni and Hondo. So it's like, oh, let's have like just a little bit of moment where, before Hondo walks into the back of Slave One, he turns, and there's like just a little bit of a heartfelt moment between the two. Like, how can you generate family outside of family?
Yes.
Always trying to find little things like that. But yeah, to talk about the younglings, at that time, I remember like people were talking about what's the next series going to be. I wanted a younglings episode, a series.
Oh, man.
Like all those younglings. I think that I noticed in the new Tales of the Jedi that came out, Gunji, who was the Wookiee youngling,
yes,
made an appearance. So I was super excited about that.
Yes. Well, that's in wait, yeah, is it Tales?
That's in Tales, yeah. That's in Tales.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it was.
No, actually, I think it was Bad Batch.
No, it was that Bad Batch too. Yeah, maybe it was.
Yes,
yeah,
it was Bad
you might be
Batch.
right. Yeah.
Yes.
I am not aware of these stories, by the way. I'm not working on it now, so I please don't. I'm not giving anything away. I'm not telling
giving
you
anything away. Correct.
I have no idea what's. Yeah, I'm just saying I love working on the younglings. Here. I love the younglings.
Yeah, no secrets here. Well, there you go. That was part 1 of my conversation with Danny Keller. Go ahead and look for part 2. If it's not out already, it's will be out very shortly. But thanks again for watching. This is a great interview with him, and part 2 is even better as we get more into the details of the Clone Wars and his experience making that show with George and Dave and all the people that worked on the Clone Wars during those years. So thanks again for watching. Take care. Hit the subscribe button right here on youtube.com/Inside the Force to get all of our shows, as well as this next part with Danny Keller. So take care, everybody. See you next time. May the Force be with you.